Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be exploring acoustics and healing. With me is Karen Newell, who is the co-founder of a company called Sacred Acoustics, and she is also co-author with Evan Alexander of a new book called Living in a Mindful Universe. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Jeff. It's nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you as well. And you began your quest in terms of your own desire to become a meditator and the difficulty you were having meditating, which is a common problem.
Yes. Really, as a young child, I had always been curious, like most people, why are we here? What is our purpose? And when I would turn to the typical kind of sources like religion or secular school science, I really found the answers very lacking. Yeah. And so that turned me to a lot of different alternative types of learning. So I got exposed to things like the Kabbalah, ancient Vedic texts, different ways of looking at the world than what I was being taught.
As a young person?
Yes, as a young person. And so by the time I was in my 20s, I was pretty certain that a lot of what I had learned in school wasn't necessarily the capital T truth. And one of those was our ancient past. Mm-hmm. You know, we learned about those pyramids on the Giza Plateau in Egypt, right, that they were built by thousands of slaves over a couple of decades, just by carrying stones. But at the same time, they tell us that the engineering feats that they achieved could not be duplicated with all of our modern technological equipment. So I knew there was something going on that we weren't being told, that somehow we had lost some information. And in my search for all of this kind of truth, I learned the value of meditation. Mm-hmm. I learned that it was really important not to just do book learning, but to know things firsthand yourself. But I didn't have any, crazy dreams or interesting visions coming to me like so many of these spiritual teachers. But I learned we could all kind of cultivate these experiences on our own. Mm-hmm. And so I did start to learn techniques for meditation. But that turned out to be kind of frustrating because when I would sit quietly, like many people suggest, maybe pay attention to the breath, my mind would just be racing along, making shopping lists, reviewing arguments I may have had the day before, thinking about conversations I wanted to have the next day. I couldn't quiet my mind.
And I know in your book you refer to that as the linguistic brain.
Yes, the linguistic brain, the brain that has constant words. It seems like our minds have to constantly be manufacturing sentences and language, and it speaks to us all the time. But when you want it to be quiet, it's not so simple to turn it off. Yeah. And so in my quest to learn meditation, one of the things that really helped me, as you said, was sound, different types of acoustics. And for me, we're all unique, so we're all going to find kind of a slightly different technique that works. But for me, regular kind of meditation, quiet, new agey kind of music wasn't really enough. Uh-huh. And it was brainwave entrainment technology that really started to make a difference.
And that's been around for quite a while now.
It has. It was actually originally discovered by this guy named Dove, a German scientist, and he discovered that when two slightly different sounds were presented to the ear, that this wavering effect takes place. And it was in the 70s when the work of Bob Monroe kind of rediscovered that and applied it in a different way. He originally was trying to come up with ways to have out-of-body experiences. And this was one of the techniques that he
because
developed.
in the out-of-body experience, as I understand it, it starts for people who are trained by the Monroe system or other systems, you want to generate a kind of vibration in your body, and that leads to a kind of separation of consciousness from the body.
Correct. Yes. And so These binaural beats, though, have many effects. That was his initial goal.
Yeah.
And what he found was, yes, some people, a small percentage of people, when they listen to these kinds of sounds, do have out-of-body experiences, but the majority of people don't. And I was one of those. I didn't have just, let's put the headphones on and I'm zip out of my body. It didn't really work that way for me. I had to work a little harder. I eventually did learn some techniques to generate out-of-body experience, but it was in combination with the tones. I applied a lot of different mental exercises.
Well, my understanding of the binaural beat syndrome or experience that people have, you experienced with me yesterday, the Peruvian whistling pots that I have that create a binaural beat. And my friend Dan Statnikoff, who did the research on these pots, shows that if you have an oscilloscope in the room and you have two pots, and you're whistling on these pots, you will get a signal from each pot. But if you're in the room listening, you hear a third sound that won't show up on the oscilloscope that's just produced within the brain itself.
That's correct. That's that kind of wah, wah, wah wavering sound. And what's so fascinating is not only those ancient Peruvian whistles, but things like Tibetan brass bowls, quartz crystal bowls, didgeridoos. These instruments can all be played in such a fashion that they create that sound. And of course, 10, 20,000 years ago, whenever this was going on, they didn't call it binaural beats. That's just a modern way of describing it. But we find when we analyze crystal bowls, like you said, we see there is a built-in binaural. And even if you're, say, on a train or an airplane or something that's making a regular kind of sound, even a washing machine, all of us kind of get into this quiet little zone. And things like tuning forks and gongs do the same thing. And that was exactly the kind of music that that started me able to settle my mind a little more easily than just sitting there waiting for it to happen.
Technically speaking, to my understanding, the brain actually does a calculation. It can calculate the frequency between the two other frequencies, and then it translates that in your sensorium, your inner experience, into an additional sound. That's
correct. And the space between the tones actually corresponds to the different brainwave states that can be measured with an EEG. So the delta state is the state we're all in when we're sleeping, and that's roughly 0 to 4 hertz. Just up from that, 4 to 7 hertz or 8 hertz is theta, and then 7 or 8 hertz to 12 hertz is alpha. 12 to 30 hertz, that's the beta state. That's the state we're in right now, walking, talking.
Normal waking consciousness.
Thinking, constant thinking. And so getting the brain into those lower states of awareness helps us to shut down that linguistic center and get into states that are associated with meditation, with relaxation. The hypnagogic state is that state right between awake and asleep, where the body is profoundly relaxed, really almost physically asleep, but the mind is still aware. And we're all in this state when we first fall asleep at night, when we first wake up in the morning. We're kind of just getting our bearings, especially when you travel and you're waking up in a new location and you forget where you are. It's kind of that in-between world state that we can engender by using these different frequencies.
And now you've also found that these frequencies are related to healing.
Well, as it happens, there are a lot of people who work with sound and healing. There are very many multitudes of ways to approach combining sound with healing. Our approach has been that when people listen to these sounds, they start to basically get in touch with the part of themselves that's not their physical body. So some people might call it their soul, their essence. Really, it's just the part of you that's not physical, your emotions, your thoughts, your spiritual self. And so when people quiet the physical body, they start to get more in touch with what I really kind of called the vibrational essence of who we are. And when you get more in touch with that vibrational essence, you start to become more aligned with your whole self, not just the physical body. It's a mistake to think that we're only physical. There is a part of us that is beyond all of that, and we can all access that by getting quiet inside. And so when we get more aligned with that essence, at least in our world, we find that healing just kind of starts to happen. Mm-hmm. And of course, when people apply their own intention and other techniques while using the sounds, it can have remarkable effects. Some people use them to reduce their awareness of pain in their body. Mm-hmm. So we don't like to say it cures the pain, but it reduces their awareness of the pain. So people who have neuropathy or different types of neuroma, they listen to these tones and become less aware of the physical body. And so in a sense, that can be thought of as a healing effect. Mm-hmm. Some people listen and migraine headaches go away. Different types of things are helped, especially people who have trouble focusing. People who have trouble with like ADHD is a kind of a common diagnosis a lot of times for people who can't get quiet and study. And when you listen to these tones, it really can help with focus as well. Mm-hmm. And this can help with healing because this reduces or actually increases the parasympathetic nervous system. It helps reduce anxiety. It helps bring people into a calmer state, which is very good for the physical body. We actually have a psychiatrist in New York City who's just completed a pilot study with her patients, and she had them fill out a form that's commonly used in psychiatric practices, the State Trait Anxiety Inventory form. She had them fill this out, and then those who incorporated the tones into their practice after 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, these different intervals, she found that their anxiety improved by about 25 points. Mm-hmm. And the people who were doing just therapy alone without the tones, theirs increased maybe by 8 points or so. Mm-hmm. So the combination of this intensive therapy with these frequencies started to help people kind of see their problems in a different light. They were able to rise above the everyday drama of different problems that they perceived. They could see them in a different light and realize that they had more ability to manage their unfolding reality than they previously believed.
Well, it sounds like there seem to be two different processes involved as you're describing it. One is the awakening of what you call the non-physical self, the mm-hmm. spirit, and which has just natural healing abilities. Once spirit is awakened, I think people typically find that they can heal themselves and others effortlessly. Mm-hmm. But the other aspect of this, it might well be that there's some sort of I would call it mechanical effect of the sound vibrations on the nervous system and on the cells of the body directly.
Yeah, well, what I found personally, mm-hmm. and many, many reports from other people, is that they seem to activate, the tones seem to activate something that's already inside of us. Mm-hmm. And very often it's emotional traumas from the past that maybe we didn't really learn how to process. I don't believe our Western culture is really suited to teach all of us how to process our emotions properly as we go through our lives. In fact, my experience is that we're taught to stuff our emotions, to ignore our emotions, that they get in our way, and to overcome our emotions by ignoring them. And in the end, those emotions get stored into our system. And so sometimes when people listen, they'll start to activate these memories or these feelings that they had from the past. And when that happens, it's an absolute beautiful opportunity to acknowledge them and release them. And they can't be released until you feel them again. And this can be a little tricky for some people. It was for me when I first started meditating, because when I finally did start to get the hang of it, a lot of times I would just start to cry. And I thought, why is this even important? And it seemed to be just a thing I had to get through. What I found, though, is all of that crying turned into this amazing cathartic release. And after such a release, it gets filled up with something different, something better. And it can happen in layers. It can happen over time when you're releasing something from an old, emotional trauma, maybe from decades ago. It doesn't necessarily happen just with the snap of a finger. Our Western culture is really taught to think that's how these things should happen. We're taught that when we have pain, you just take a painkiller and the pain goes away. Now, antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds are very common, and people think that you can just take a pill, modify your brain's chemistry, and all those emotions will somehow resolve. And I feel that it really is a combined effort that, I don't want to poo-poo the medicines too much because I know that they are very valuable to some people in some instances. But we also need to be addressing our internal emotional wounds.
Well, it strikes me that we live in a culture where there's a lot of suffering going on, and illness, accidents, social oppression of various sorts. And we tend to protect ourselves from experiencing the suffering of the world, and we numb ourselves so that we don't feel anything. But as you say, those feelings, they're there somewhere. You could say in the subconscious mind or in our spiritual memory. They're there. So as we open up to a sense of spiritual awareness, it's natural to begin to feel compassion for all the suffering in the world, and that's an adjustment.
It is. It is natural to feel, and we need to learn how to feel again. And one way that I really tapped into that, the other technique that worked really well for me, in addition to the sound, was awareness of the heart. Mm-hmm. And that came from a lot of different directions, but I started learning how to do something that is called Sufi heart rhythm meditation. Mm-hmm. And that's basically just trying to match your breathing with the number of heartbeats you have in various ways. Mm-hmm. And when you start to match your breathing to your heartbeat, this is really an interesting thing that happens. When you do this, it absolutely starts to activate these stored emotions, these feelings, and you find that you have these blockages that you didn't realize you had. At least that's what happened for me. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I was learning about the research from HeartMath Institute in California.
Yes.
Now, they've been studying the heart scientifically for decades. Mm-hmm. And what they found is that each of us who has a heart has an electromagnetic field emanating from the heart. And it comes out of the heart like this, and it moves around and comes back into the heart from below. It moves in all directions at once, but it's in the shape of a torus field. Mm-hmm. So that's like a donut with a hole in the middle, and the hole is your heart. That's the center. Mm-hmm. And so this is moving around you constantly. And they found that the size of that field actually expands and contracts based on your emotional state. So emotions like joy or happiness will have a much larger expanded electromagnetic field. But emotions like sadness, depression, anger, envy, those kinds of emotions have a very contracted heart field. And so a lot of people who read auras, I don't know if this is related, but this is an actual electromagnetic field, very subtle. Interestingly, it is much larger than the brain's. The brain actually emits an electromagnetic field as well.
Now, the heart's about 1,000 times more powerful.
Well, the electric field of the heart is 60 times greater than the brain.
60.
The magnetic is 3,000 times larger. So much, much larger than the brain's. And in our world, we've really been taught to think that the brain is in charge of everything. But the heart, they have found, actually sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. The heart also seems to collect information out into the world and bring it back in, which might explain intuitive sensing. I don't know for certain, but it's a thought. What's really fascinating to me is how one heart affects other hearts around it. They've done studies at HeartMath, say, where one person will be sitting across the table from another, and the one person who's aware of the experiment is performing what they call a coherence technique. Now, a coherence technique is simply feeling a sense of gratitude or appreciation in your heart. Not thinking about the gratitude, but feeling it. And this is not so simple to do. But someone who feels a sense of gratitude sitting across from someone else, the person across from them, their heart rate variability and their brainwave state will start to match and entrain to the person sitting across from them. This is the most fascinating thing to me, because a lot of people immediately go to, well, how can I protect myself from all that suffering in the world that you were just speaking of? How can I keep all of that non-beneficial energy from affecting me? But I did it the other way around. I thought, how can I not hurt anyone else around me through non-beneficial emotions I'm carrying in my system? Because none of us can manage anyone else's heart field. We can only manage our own. So it's a losing battle to think, how can I affect what's going on over there?
Right.
When you can actually affect them most strongly by paying attention to your own heart. So I liken this to the ultimate golden rule. You know, the idea that we love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And mostly when people talk about the golden rule, they talk about, well, how can I love my neighbor when they're so different than me, when they don't do things that I appreciate? How can I have compassion for someone who doesn't agree with my way of looking at the world? It's very challenging to do that. But another way of applying that golden rule is the loving yourself part. So many of us, myself included, had no idea how to love myself. And what I figured out just through my own personal experimentation is that when I began to generate these feelings of gratitude and appreciation, now for me, it was puppies that did it for me, because when I was 6 years old, my mother took in a stray dog who proceeded to have puppies underneath my bed. And so this was a beautiful, magical, innocent moment. But all of us will have something different. Children, babies, sometimes we think, oh, that unconditional love of a child can do it. But at the time I was working on this, my daughter was a kind of a difficult teenager. So it was a little challenging to find those loving feelings. But we can find something, all of us. And once I started to feel that gratitude in my heart, I would do things like give money to a homeless man and feel their gratitude inside of me. It was absolutely amazing and different than the thought of, oh, I'm helping this man. I felt his gratitude. And I realized that loving myself was more related to generating love from within and becoming that vibration of love. And each and every one of us on the planet can learn how to do this. Every morning in public school, I think they still do this in the United States, where children place their hand over their heart and say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I have this idea that if at the same moment these children could just generate a feeling of gratitude about anything, that if every child and teacher in that school did this for a few moments, that there would be less bullying, people would be paying more attention to their schoolwork and learning, and people would be getting along. And this could even grow from there. Every person in Congress, every CEO at a business meeting, right? Every person in the world, every doctor, every healer. I feel like if healers, any kind of healer, was taking time to feel that compassion, that warmth, that love inside of their own self, knowing that it's affecting the people around them. This is what I call the ultimate golden rule.
Well, I do recall a case of a school in Minnesota, a grade school, I believe it was, where the principal had every student march past him in the morning when they come into school, and they had to say, look him right in the eye and say to the principal, I love myself.
Ah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I wonder how that went.
Enormous behavioral changes, all positive. And sometimes the kids would be in a bad mood and they'd say, I love myself. And the principal would say, try that again.
I had not heard of that.
Yes,
that is wonderful. So it started somewhere.
Yeah. It's about self-esteem.
Yes.
And there are various organizations that have been promoting what they call total unconditional acceptance or total unconditional love of yourself, that it starts there. If you can love yourself, you can love everything.
Yes. And speaking of schools, there was a school in Baltimore that I'm aware of. And inner city Baltimore is not, the
tough place.
Yeah, it's a tough place because I used to live there. And there was a school there where when children would it was an elementary school, where children would get in trouble. Normally they might be sent to in-school suspension. Instead, they sent them to the mindful moment room, and they would sit there, maybe think about what they had done from their own perspective, and then bring that feeling of loving self-esteem into their bodies instead of being blamed and told how they did something wrong. Of course they did something wrong, but usually we behave badly when we have a wound inside that wants attention. And so rather than trying to correct the bad behavior, addressing that wound inside has much better effect. That school no longer, at least that year, whenever they were doing it, 0 suspension rate. All of the children stayed in school. And so, yes, these people who are doing this is absolutely wonderful, but we need to bring it to like a national policy level or an everyday kitchen table discussion. We talk about, everyone seems to kind of know up here that love is the most important thing. When you ask them about meaning of life or the purpose of being, everyone will bring love into the equation. But how many of us actually live it on a daily basis? And I'd love to see some of that talk turn into action.
Well, we began by discussing acoustics.
Yes.
And we've talked about acoustics and healing and how acoustics has helped you with meditation. Do you think that acoustics can awaken that sense of love for oneself and for others?
It actually can. And what's really amazing is there's a acupuncturist in Iowa who was using our recordings, helping young people, teenagers, who have attempted to commit suicide and failed. So they're still with us. And now we're trying to, get them back into enjoying life.
And they must be in terrible emotional shape.
Terrible emotional. Yes. And so this acupuncturist, the acupuncture helps, and they have a number of different techniques in this particular therapy. But she started playing our sacred acoustics recordings during her sessions. And some of these children started telling her things like, if only I had felt this way before I tried to kill myself, I never would have tried. If only I had felt this connection to something greater than me, I wouldn't have felt so alone. And so, yes, there's a desperate need in our world for bringing all different kinds of ways to remind people, that we're emotional, spiritual, vibrational beings who have a meaning and purpose for being here, and we're all connected. We are not alone, and many of us in a state where we're going to get to the point where we're even thinking about killing ourselves must feel very alone in the world. And getting back to that sense of connection to something greater is always going to be a healing effect.
Now, your company puts out these recordings, and as you've discussed earlier, they involve the binaural beat. I'm under the impression from what you're saying, they also involve particular frequencies that you found to be most effective.
They do. And for us, we focus mostly on the harmonics of the different carrier frequencies. And the carrier frequencies are the actual sounds that you hear, the sounds that we're feeding into the brain, not the differential of the 4 hertz, because we can't hear that low. We can't hear below 20 hertz. And so all of the carrier frequencies that we choose are combined in such a way that there's all harmonic relationships between each and every one of them. And not all binaural beat producers do this. And when we started to do this, we found that people started having richer experience. They started feeling more than they may already have been with the standard binaural beats. We include isochronic tones, or monaural beats is actually the specific term, with the binaural beats into a technology we call neural helix. And it is a proprietary way of combining all of these frequencies. But the harmonics are critical because binaural beats, they're available on apps and, free YouTube videos and things like that. But very often they're accompanied by white noise, pink noise, water, because they're challenging to listen to in their raw form. And when we combine the different frequencies with harmonic principles, suddenly they become more pleasant to listen to and easier to kind of feel vibrationally. Mm-hmm. The voice is another really powerful way to generate vibrations in the body. And I've experimented with different chanting. Mm-hmm. And of course, Om is
that's ancient.
Yes. The classic, mm-hmm. Hindu sound and many other traditions who acknowledge the Om sound. Mm-hmm. But for me, it wasn't the meaning of it. It was the experience of it. And when you make the sound Om, all of us can do this ourselves and discover that when you experiment with a different pitch, like the higher pitches, for me, I could feel more up in this area. Mm-hmm. The lower pitches, I could actually feel my heart area vibrate. Mm-hmm. And so we liken this to, at the beginning of many of our recordings, we recommend that people make that Om sound, and experimenting with the pitches will create different vibrations. When you can create that vibration in your heart area, and then you hear the vibrations of the tones, you suddenly become more aware of that vibrational essence that we all are, and imagine that the vibration then is carried by the sound mm-hmm. into whatever your being wishes to experience that day.
Well, now, I'm sure you're familiar with the theory of the chakras mm-hmm. and the concept that we have these centers of psychic sensitivity as part of our subtle body. And I would imagine a lot of people who work with sound are looking at how particular kinds of sound will affect different chakras of the body.
Yes, there are people who have studied exactly that. We haven't done too much of the specific mm-hmm. chakras and their effects, mostly because we found that people respond so differently. It's hard to make the claim that, that some people do, that 528 hertz is the heart frequency, mm-hmm. But yes, they are definitely involved, all the different energy mm-hmm. centers. And for example, my business partner, Kevin Cossey, when he does his oming, he makes his pineal gland vibrate. Oh. So, and that's the sixth chakra, the third mm-hmm. eye. And so, yes, he works with that chakra, whereas I work with the heart chakra. Other people might work with the solar plexus chakra mm-hmm. and so on. Mm-hmm. So, yes, they're very powerful energy centers, although we haven't specifically yet created frequencies for each chakra.
Well, you're focusing on the heart, which is the central one. And as you pointed out, it's sort of the pacemaker for the whole body.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a pacemaker for our whole energy system, too. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so amazing. Now, your listeners can all try this for themselves on sacredacoustics.com. We offer a free 20-minute download, which is actually our Om frequencies. Uh-huh. And those are created with the harmonics of 108, 216, and 432. So those are some numbers that some people might be familiar with, because there are some theories out there that 432 is a preferred tuning over the standard 440 mm-hmm. hertz out there. And so that's one of the reasons we incorporated that into our Om.
Well, if people check the listings page for New Thinking Aloud and go to your name, all of our guests are listed alphabetically. So if they go to Karen Newell, it will link directly to your website.
Okay, wonderful.
They'll have the opportunity to click in and experience that.
Yes, not only experience it, but we have a series of absolutely free training videos to teach people how to get started. So there's a very easy entry point for this. It doesn't require a huge investment. We do recommend using headphones. Mm-hmm. So good quality headphones that are comfortable to wear for a long period is really the only necessary investment for this. Mm-hmm.
Well, Karen Newell, what an interesting exploration. And I gather now you're a regular meditator?
Yes, absolutely. What I found is that the tones really have served as an excellent training situation, training wheels, as we say. And so it's now much easier for me to get into meditative states without any tools at all. And so sometimes, though, it's still really fun to listen to the tones again and get into those even deeper states. Regular meditators sometimes find that the tones get in their way because they've already developed their techniques. But we know many regular meditators who find that they can go even deeper when they incorporate the tones and start to have experiences they didn't have otherwise. So they're well suited to beginners and regular meditators alike.
Karen Newell, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you for being with us.